China and India, Asia's most populous countries and two of its largest economies. After 70 years of diplomatic relations, how is the relationship developing? With COVID-19 posing a rising threat to India, how will the country and its economy be affected? And what can be done in terms of China-India health cooperation? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by Professor Swaran Singh from the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, Professor Zhang Jiadong from Fudan University in Shanghai, and N.R. Tongan, independent current affairs commentator here in Beijing. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So let me start with you, Professor Singh. To stem the pandemic from spreading in a nation of 1.3 billion people, I know the Indian government has imposed a 21-day lockdown. But the infection cases in your country is not so huge, considerably, more than 1,500. Why does India need to have a national lockdown?
Given that India can learn from experience of both countries like China, South Korea, Singapore, which are successful examples, and examples of Italy, Spain, and United States, there are obviously no easy choices for India to make. And what India has done is to lock down the entire country for 3 weeks with an intention of finding the hotspots so that then the focus will shift to those hotspots. Government of India has already identified 10 such districts in the country which are seen as hotspots, and I think very soon we will see that other areas will soon begin to open up and begin to live normal life gradually, and focus will shift to these hotspots where attention needs to be given. But I understand there are a certain amount of disruption, but as I said, given this pandemic, there are no easy choices, and I think Chinese friends fully understand the limitations under which Government of India is functioning and how people are also trying to sort of co-opt and provide certain amount of help, whether these are cultural organizations, religious organizations, non-government organizations. So people's movement is also supporting government initiatives. I hope numbers will stay low, but it's also because India's testing has been very limited. And I think that is partly why the numbers of infected people are also, as of now, are seen as limited. Maybe when we increase the testing of people, numbers might go up. But, you know, these are difficult times and difficult decisions are being made in India and in the rest of the world, as you understand.
Are you suggesting because the limited capacity of testing, maybe India hasn't got the real number of infections in the country?
It's very likely that given the number of testing being limited and the number of infected, the known are also limited as of now. But each country, as you see, has adopted their own unique strategy in addressing this pandemic. So India's strategy has been so far, not to really push people into any panic mode, because that could create enormous difficulties of unrest and disbelief and distrust of the government. So government is trying to also have as much piecemeal approach as possible. But as I said, once they have identified the hotspots, then the number of testing is going to increase suddenly, and it's likely that the number of infected people in coming weeks will also rise. But the entire effort, as you know, as epidemiologists are saying, is to flatten the curve, to make sure that numbers are not such that they overwhelm India's already weak health sector and health capacity. So that is the effort to make sure that A, country does not get into panic mode, and B, we can have a staggered approach of dealing with this pandemic, focusing more on the epicenter or the hot areas where we need to focus much more.
But there were some reports saying some of
down.
the Indians are already in panic mode because of the nationwide lockdown. Some villagers have to rush home. The aim of the quarantine is to reduce social distances, but still some people have to pack together and go home in buses or in droves. How would you describe the effectiveness of the national lockdown?
as you mentioned, in about 1.3 billion people, yes, there are places where you can see the crowds, and India has about 400 million people of workforce in this informal or unorganized sector. And what you're seeing in terms of crowds trying to rush home is from the mega cities, where what has happened is that the projects have come to halt, and many of these people actually live and stay on those project areas. And if there is no job and no place to stay, many of them are not as yet very confident of municipal services or government providing them good life, food and shelter. So they are finding maybe going home is an easier option. Of course, sustainability of life in rural areas, in smaller towns is relatively easier, because in crowded areas in cities, especially the slums dwellings, it's very difficult to do social distancing.
Okay.
So many people are in panic, yes, and they are rushing home, but that's a very limited number if you look at the entire country. And even for them, even on the way home, country is seeing many of these camps being set up by various cultural religious organizations who are trying to assure them that they could stay wherever they are and not keep moving on the road. And I assume there is a clear change in last 1 week, that people are being given shelters on the way, wherever they are going, and given food in those areas. But I understand there is a certain amount of panic, certain amount of dislocation, but I suppose it is only difficult choice as to how quickly these people can be brought into trust, can be provided shelters, and therefore we can keep numbers low. Keeping numbers low, I think, is the main focus that India is trying to achieve.
And Professor Zhang, keeping numbers low, China also experienced the same thing. China's been there and done that. On January the 23rd, Wuhan was locked down, and the whole province of Hubei was locked down. What do you think China can tell India when India is bracing for impact?
So firstly, I think, and we should tell our Indian friends. Personally, I think lockdown is a very necessary and very efficient. Of course, lockdown also will face lots of challenges. Even in China, lots of Chinese people complain, and lots of loss of freedom and loss of happiness and family issue. It's very normal. But I do think, and China, what China can do is what India can do. Every country in the world can't dare to say they are ready for coronavirus. Every country's capability is limited, not just China, not just India. I think many other countries, we can see US and including lots of European countries, their capability is also very limited. It's very natural. So at this time, and what I want to say is, I think Indian government should have a much good communication and engagements with the people. I think Indian people understand what government is doing. Just Chinese people understand what the Chinese government is doing. Personally, I think India, we can do something more. Not just talk, communicate. We can have lots of cooperations, I think, in the future.
And obviously, different countries have different approaches how to contain the spread. What do you think the Indians and the Chinese can share? And maybe also Americans can learn something from what the Asian countries have been doing.
Well, it'd be nice if Donald Trump would learn. He doesn't seem to listen to his science advisors. He continues to contradict them on air when they're standing next to him. So I don't know that we're looking for the U.S. to learn anything. But I think it's very clear that this idea that this so far has been about developed countries. You start talking about South Korea, Japan, Europe, America, China, China being a developing, emerging. But quite frankly, when you start dealing with India, Indonesia, South America, many places like this, you're talking about healthcare systems which, as the professor from India pointed out, my colleague, they don't have the robustness to deal with this. So they're doing what is necessary. There's always a lot of condemnation that this is too tough. But if you're not tough at this point, all you'll be doing is piling up more dead bodies. And that is really the lesson that should be learned in the U.S., that they have the ability, the wealth, to shut down the nation for 2 months, do everything that India is doing, and they would emerge much more quickly from this. If they drag it out, unfortunately, it does not only hurt the United States, but it would also hurt the world.
But don't you think, Einar, every country is now facing the choices whether the cure is worse than the problem, as Donald Trump pointed out, because people are struggling to maintain their jobs and also want to keep a distance from each other. That seems a mission impossible.
Well, I think he has his priority wrong. I think the evidence is becoming extremely clear that if you lock down for 2 months, you can then begin to rebuild your economy. But if you don't do that, what happens is the COVID-19 continues on for 6-8 months. Your economy continues to suffer during that period of time. And in the end, you will have to go to a 2-month lockdown in order to kind of tame this virus. So putting it off into the future is actually only going to cost you more in terms of the economy. China has it right. It pioneered it. It was first in. It's first out. People should be looking. They can do it their own way. All right, Sweden's doing it their way. You know, South Korea did it theirs. Singapore theirs. It is not a question of following, but you have to have a plan to crack down on this virus and contain it. You can't ameliorate it. You can't just see what happens and hope that the body count isn't too large and you can go on with your economy. That is turning out to be a pointless exercise.
So, Professor Singh, this question also will be faced by the Indians. How long will the Indians endure the economic pain because of the loss of the jobs as a result of the lockdown?
Very clearly, I think India has its own advantages. Being a rapidly developing but nevertheless a country with an enormous poor population, India already has a very large number of support mechanisms which are now put into use at a much rapid pace, and then much more resources are being pumped into those mechanisms. So we already have mechanisms to support the poor population of India. But I think there are, of course, worries as to how long one can
What are the
continue
mechanisms you're
in such kind
referring
of a
to, Professor
lockdown.
Singh? What are the mechanisms, to be exact?
I think the biggest one among these is one of the Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which is supposed to provide 100 days employment to entire rural population of India. And several other pensions, for example, or support system for widows, support system for people who are physically challenged. And they are being given now their support system pensions 3 times in sort of increased fashion. These are smaller amounts, but in Indian system, when you look at it in purchasing power parity terms, they do provide a certain support system. And India also has a great tradition of philanthropy, great tradition of charity, and I think society also is coming up and becoming very active in supporting these initiatives of Indian Prime Minister. We have a Prime Minister who is very, very savvy in terms of using technology. He's good at communication. He's already spoken to Indians twice. He's spoken to provincial leaders, all the diplomats that are in India. He's spoken to G20 nations. It was his initiative, as you remember. So the leadership is quite in command. He's known for someone who can organize mega events, as you saw recently during President Trump's visit to India. So we are in competent leadership hands, and I think support of society is being generated, and he's trying to make sure it becomes a people's movement, which will help us to sustain these difficult times for a little longer time.
And are the Indian people
sure
prepared for the worst to come? Because by judging what happened in Europe and America, they are the most advanced countries in the world. America had probably 200,000 ventilators, but they're still in short supply, and India has only 40,000. Can you be sure that the medical system in India can withstand the pressure if the infection cases go dramatically high?
As I said, India is trying to keep numbers low so that the health sector support does not get overwhelmed by this pandemic. But at the same time, I think India is lucky to get certain amount of time, because India is a late comer into this pandemic, being a threat for the society. We are able to learn from other countries. I understand we have had communications regular with China, for instance. We are open to support from other countries. Our industrial sectors are shedding what they are doing on normal basis. For example, companies which are producing automobiles are today producing ventilators. And lots of such initiatives are being generated, I think partly because we are able to learn from other countries' experiences. No doubt there is an enormous pressure, enormous concern, and this workforce leaving megacities would mean that maintenance of several of the normal living ways of life, of the things that we consume, will get into sort of difficulties over a period of time. But at this stage, government is only looking at 3 weeks, and they want to make a major reassessment after 3 weeks. And then I think focus will shift to only the areas which are known as the sort of areas of concern. As I said, already 10 districts have been identified. And the focus therefore is to contain it. And if we can contain it, maybe our support systems will be able to manage it. Hopefully, we are also talking of summer having an onset now. And there are people who are saying because of temperatures going up, the spread would also slow down. So there are all kinds of other estimates being made. There is a possibility of the antidote vaccine developing. Chinese are really working hard on it. And I think some of those systems might also develop. It's simply an effort to keep the numbers low, buy more time so that the support could come, solution could come. But I understand that it is going to cause enormous difficulties. And I think India is a country where people are very religiously oriented. In that sense, I think they also know how to bear difficult times. And they sort of believe in God in that sense.
As you said, the containment
is
very costly.
These difficult times.
And Prime Minister Modi has been promoting Made in Indian strategy. But the fear of the spread of the COVID-19 would definitely have a huge impact on New Delhi's ambition and vision to upgrade manufacturing, considering it will probably have a lockdown of 21 days, and that also can be elongated if the case does not stabilize.
I think you're right. This is going to be a very major hit for the global economy. And it's not just India internally getting affected. You understand that developing emerging economies like China and India are also major contributors to the global growth rates. And therefore, I think it's going to be an impacting global economy. People are saying is already undergoing recession. So those are challenges which would definitely crop up. Some of the initiatives in that direction are also being taken in India. There is an economic task force which is already established. Several other special committees are established. So those are also areas where Government of India is working and is aware of the challenges that exist. But I think at this stage, the first challenge is to save lives, save people, and minimize the damage that this pandemic can do in terms of casualties of life. Of course, then we'll have to address the impact on Indian economy, on specific programs like Make in India. I'm sure China and India will have to coordinate much more again to make sure we are having a complementary relationship, and some of these initiatives could help each other in regenerating and redeeming economic growth as well.
And China has been seeing some initial success in terms of containing the virus. Now many of the cities in China has come back to normal, and China has provided humanitarian assistance by providing masks, testing kits, and PPE to other countries. Jack Ma, a private entrepreneur, has donated medical materials to India. So when China was in trouble just 2 months ago, many countries provided help, and China wanted to give back. But many other critics in the West, especially, they're saying this is mass diplomacy. This is have ulterior motives. What do you think, Professor Singh?
I think we should avoid politicizing these things. This is a time to save human lives. Anyone who can provide help to the most needed should be providing that help. Yes, there will always be voices which will be looking at the conspiracy theories, looking at ulterior motives. China definitely has an advantage of being the producer, the factory of the world, and its factories are beginning to function again. I think that's a good news. China has virtually overcome the difficulty, and I think it is going out to help several other nations. That should be seen in positive light. And I think the focus should be on where the need is most urgent and where China needs to really go and help out, rather than, politicizing these issues. And I think one should simply ignore some of these criticism at this stage. What is important is whether we can save lives around the world as much as we can. China stands advantage of having kind of controlled its pandemic first. China has advantage of manufacturing lots of health sector products around the world, and I think China is going out and helping. I hear about 80 countries now. China's Belt and Road Initiative connects that to other countries. I think that is also facilitating the easy communications and easy transport and easy information flows. Focus has to be here on how to save human lives.
Okay.
And I don't think this is a time to politicize who is helping for what motives. Even if there are motives, I don't think this is the time to discuss those motives.
Okay, Professor Zhang, how do you think China should respond to those accusations when it is trying to provide a rather helping hand to other countries in trouble?
So firstly, I want to say it's not a mask diplomacy, and even diplomats provided lots of help in assistance activities, because and coronavirus is fighting against the human beings, not just against China, India, against everyone. So in terms of controlling virus, there's no borderline between different countries. So, just as you mentioned, 2 months ago, the world was supporting China, and 2 months later, China should support the world. And it's something between humans, not just between nation states. So I don't like a mask diplomacy or any this kind of words. So it's not very good for the world, for current world. And currently, we do need international cooperation and international communication in fighting against the common threats of human beings. So in the future, I think internationally, different countries should have more efficient cooperation, including exchange of technologies, and including providing a lot of facilities for trade of medical issue, for share of medical technologies. I think it should be very important, and especially between China and India. And our two countries are very, very similar. And we have a big population, we have similar economic development level, we have very similar social developments. So we can share lots of controlling virus experience each other. So.
And to the bigger picture of bilateral relations, Professor Zhang, we know it is 7 decades since China-India established diplomatic ties, and actually the historic ties can be traced even further back, thousands of years ago. How do you see the current China-India relationships going forward?
So currently, I think China-India relationship is stable and sustainable, and maybe the best time, not best time, should be very good time between China and India. And comparing to 1950s, China-India relationship was much better than today. But at that time, it's also very unsustainable. But currently, and I do believe the level of China-India relationship is still very low comparing to countries' size, comparing to countries' international importance. So in the future, I think China and India should do much more to strengthen, to consolidate bilateral relationship, and strategically, economically, even people-to-people ties. Chinese and India will have biggest two populations, but China, India, people-to-people exchange is very low, and the size is very small. Is unbelievable small. So we can much more about people-to-people exchange and make people's exchange as a foundation for two countries' international relations. So I do believe in the future, in the coming 20 or 30 years, and China and India, maybe including the United States, will become top 3 powers in the world. So China-India relationship would be more important in the future. We must do something for this future.
And you are an American. When we are looking at India-China relations, we cannot forget that other countries also play a role. For example, Pakistan and the United States. How do geopolitical rivalry and major power relations factor in the relationship between China and India?
Well, quite frankly, there's a kind of a free-for-all, and you have this triangle between trade, security, and regional politics. Obviously, Pakistan and India have quite a long history and continue to be very antagonistic towards each other. You have China, which is looking for regional stability as not only in terms of trade but security. And you have the United States, who sees a rising China as a threat and therefore would like and has expressed its desire to use India as a doorstop to any kind of Chinese expansion. And so this puts things at a very difficult level. India is sometimes passive-aggressive about China's growth. Remember, India was way ahead of China 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. And today, China is way ahead of India. But I think these things have to be put aside. The fact is that China and India are the largest markets, and markets are becoming increasingly important in today's economy. And if without these, Europe can't grow, the U.S. can't grow, no one's going to sell these materials. So developing these markets and the consumers in them is to the mutual benefit of these countries and also the world. Unfortunately, the politics gets in the way.
So politics gets in the way, Professor Singh. It is very important for Indians and Chinese to have a vision about their relationship. Should they trust each other? Should they have more common ground than their differences and competitions? How do Indians think of this problem, and what is the government's role in this?
I think today is an important day. We are celebrating 70th anniversary of India-China's diplomatic relations being established. I want to compliment you for devoting your program today to this issue. I want to thank you for having me on your program. I think it's time to remember what was the vision of founding fathers of China and India when they wanted to bring these two great nations together. For about 4 centuries, we have lived in something called nation-state system. Before that, we had either kingdoms or clans. We are today...
It seems we have lost Professor Singh there. And I want your take, Professor Zhang. Obviously, China and India are big powers in Asia, but they still have to face the choices, how to position their relationship and how to cooperate with each other despite some distrust in some areas. What do you think the government should do to find more common ground?
So firstly, we should acknowledge one issue, and between China and India, we have lots of structural problems there. It's okay, we acknowledge any problem. But and the two countries' relationship is beyond just the problems. We have lots of cooperation areas. So just as I mentioned just a little bit before. So firstly, we should improve two countries' economic and the trade relationship. And today, and the two countries' economic relationship is still very low. And then people-to-people exchange is very important. We have ancient people-to-people exchange. We can date this time back to 1,500 years ago. But today is very small. And for these two issues, if we can do it well, we can find a very good base for China-India relationship. And China and India between our two countries, we can have 3 levels of relationship. The first is competition, the second is cooperation, but we still can have lots of family-style relationship between our two countries. I can find in both our two countries, some people say no for a better China-India relationship, but we still can find lots of people say yes for a better China-India relationship. According to my understanding,
we're running out of time.
Leaders,
thank you very much,
Chinese
Professor
Xi Jinping.
I wish I had more time to talk about this. Thank you. And thank you, Einar. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Goodbye for now.